She gave up everything to start over, sold the house, signed the papers, drove away with nothing but a suitcase and a little cash. All she bought was an abandoned home at the edge of a forgotten Appalachian town. But on her very first night inside that abandoned home, Linda Ashcroft found a mysterious key hidden beneath the floorboards, a key that fit no lock. No doors, no cabinets, no cellar. What that key unlocked wasn't money, it wasn't gold. It was something far more powerful, and once she opened it, her life would never be small again. Before we begin, if you believe it's never too late to start over, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Linda Ashcroft was 58 years old the day she signed the final divorce paper and handed over the keys to the only house she had ever called home. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet pen scratching across paper in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and old carpet. 32 years of marriage reduced to a signature, and a polite nod goodbye. A week later, she sold almost everything she owned. The china cabinet her mother left her, the dining table where birthdays were celebrated, even the rocking chair by the window where she used to sit and wait for her husband to come home late from work. She kept only what would fit in her aging blue pickup truck and a small envelope of savings she had guarded for years just in case. That envelope bought her a forgotten farmhouse on the outskirts of a small Appalachian town called Briar Glen. The house sat alone at the end of a gravel road, wrapped in tall grass and silence. Its porch sagged. Its windows were clouded with dust. The roof wore its rust like a crown of neglect. But when Linda stepped onto that porch for the first time, she didn't see ruin. She saw a second chance. The first night Linda Ashcroft slept in the farmhouse, the wind spoke louder than her thoughts. It slipped through cracks in the walls and hummed beneath the floorboards like the house was trying to remember how to breathe. She lay on a borrowed air mattress in the middle of the living room, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of cedar from the thrift store. No television, no traffic outside the window, no husband clearing his throat in the next room. Just silence. And for the first time in decades, that silence didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. Old habits. She made coffee on a small camping stove set up on the kitchen counter, watching pale blue light spill across the fields outside the window. The land stretched farther than she'd realized when she first drove up rolling hills softened by mist. A crooked fence line, and beyond that, a cluster of trees standing like quiet witnesses. She wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and began to clean. There is something sacred about cleaning a place that has been forgotten. Each sweep of her broom lifted more than dust. It lifted years of abandonment. Each rag dragged across a window pane let in more than sunlight. It let in possibility. By noon, she had uncovered hardwood floors beneath layers of dirt. By evening, she had opened every window in the house, letting fresh mountain air push out the stale scent of neglect. That's when she found it. She was in what must have once been a study, a narrow room off the main hallway with built-in shelves sagging under the weight of nothing. As she pried loose a warped floorboard near the back wall, more out of curiosity than necessity, something metallic slipped free and hit the floor with a small, hollow sound. A key! It wasn't shiny, it wasn't ornate, but it was old. The bow of it was shaped like a simple oval, worn smooth by someone's fingers long ago. The shaft was heavier than it looked, its teeth cut in a pattern she had never seen before, intricate, almost deliberate in a way that felt personal. Linda turned it over in her palm. It was warm. That didn't make sense. The house had been cold all morning. She told herself it was just from the sun touching it through the window. But still, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear, not excitement. Recognition. "Well," she whispered to the empty room, "what do you open?" She tried every door in the house. The front door no fit, the old shed out back too small, the rusted padlock on the cellar hatch not even close. She searched for trunks, boxes, anything that looked like it might belong to another era. Nothing. The key fit no lock. And yet, someone had hidden it. That night, she sat on the porch steps, the key resting in her palm as fireflies flickered in the tall grass. Her life had been like that key, she realized. For years, she had tried to fit into spaces that never quite opened for her. She had bent herself into the shape of someone else's expectations. A quiet wife, a patient partner, a woman who didn't ask for too much. And when the marriage finally ended, it wasn't because of screaming or betrayal. It ended because somewhere along the way, she had disappeared. Now here she was, 58, divorced, living in a house most people would call a mistake, holding a key that opened nothing, or so it seemed. The next day, she drove into Briar Glen for supplies. The hardware store owner, a man named Harold Pike with suspenders and kind eyes, rang up her purchases slowly. "You're the one who bought the Ashwood place, aren't you?" he asked. She nodded. He let out a low whistle. "That house has stories." "What kind of stories?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask." "Old mister. Calder built it back in the 40s. Lived there alone after his wife passed. Folks said he was particular. Particular how? Kept to himself. Locked everything. Didn't trust banks. Didn't trust people much either." Harold leaned closer over the counter. "They say when he died, no one ever found half of what he owned." Linda felt the key grow heavier in her coat pocket. "No family?" she asked. "None that claimed the place." On the drive back, her mind churned. Locked everything. Didn't trust banks. No one found half of what he owned. That evening, she studied the house with new eyes. She ran her fingers along the baseboards, tapped gently on walls, listened for hollow echoes. The farmhouse no longer felt abandoned. It felt layered, like it was waiting. And then she noticed something she hadn't before: the fireplace. Kuoitam, it stood in the center of the living room, large, made of stone, solid as the hills around it. But one stone near the bottom left corner was slightly different, smoother, less worn. She knelt down, brushing away ash and debris. The stone shifted under her hand. Her breath caught. Slowly, she pressed against it. A soft click echoed through the hearth. Linda's heart pounded in her ears. The key in her pocket suddenly felt less like a mystery, and more like a promise. She sat back on her heels, staring at the fireplace as twilight deepened outside the windows. For the first time since signing those divorce papers, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Anticipation. Whatever that key opened, it wasn't just wood or iron. It was leading her somewhere. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of where that might be. Linda didn't open the fireplace that night. Not because she wasn't curious, but because something inside her, something older than fear, told her to wait. She brewed tea instead, sat at the small wooden table she'd dragged into the kitchen, wrapped both hands around the chipped mug, and listened to the crackle of kindling in the hearth. The stone she had pressed earlier looked perfectly ordinary now, as if it had never shifted at all. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe she was projecting meaning onto an old house because she needed anything to feel purposeful again. Grief can do that to a person. It can make you search for hidden doors in places that are simply broken. Still, she could feel it. The house was holding something. The next morning, gray clouds rolled over Briar Glen like a wool blanket pulled across the sky. The air felt heavy, thick with the promise of rain. Linda knelt before the fireplace again. Her knees ached. 58 doesn't move like 38. But she lowered herself carefully, pressed her palm against that smoother stone, and pushed. Click. This time, she didn't hesitate. She reached for the iron poker resting beside the hearth and slid it into the thin seam along the stone base. With steady pressure, she pulled. A section of stone shifted outward with a grinding sound, revealing a dark cavity beneath the hearth. Cold air rushed out. Not damp, not moldy, just still. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Well, she whispered to herself, voice trembling. Here we go. She reached into her coat pocket and wrapped her fingers around the old key. The cavity wasn't large, maybe 2 feet deep, but inside sat a small iron box. Rectangular, heavy, its surface darkened with age. And at the center of the latch, a keyhole. Her breath caught so sharply it hurt. The key had always belonged here. Her hand shook as she slid the key into the lock. For one terrible second, it resisted. Then it turned. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room, like something long dormant had just awakened. She lifted the lid slowly. Not gold, not stacks of cash. Inside the box lay a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and beneath them, a thin, leather-bound journal. Linda sat back on the wooden floor, legs folded beneath her, and carefully untied the ribbon. The first envelope was addressed simply, "To whoever finds this house when they need it most." Her eyes burned before she even finished the first line. If you're reading this, it means you were brave enough to start over. I built this house with my own hands after my wife died in 1946. I thought I was building shelter. I didn't realize I was building a place to survive my own grief. This home is not valuable because of what it hides. It is valuable because of what it gives back. Linda pressed the letter to her chest. She hadn't expected that. She had expected secrets. Instead, she found confession. She turned the page. If you found the key, then you are likely standing where I once stood alone, uncertain, carrying more loss than you thought your heart could bear. There is no treasure here, only truth. Do not measure your life by what you lost. Measure it by what you are willing to build next. A sob broke loose from somewhere deep inside her. Not the polite kind she had mastered in courtrooms and grocery store parking lots. This was raw, ugly, healing. She wept there on the floor of that forgotten farmhouse for the marriage she had tried to save alone, for the years she had silenced herself, for the version of her that had disappeared somewhere between compromise and survival. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Rain began tapping against the windows. She read through the rest of the letters slowly. The old man Samuel Calder. She now knew his full name had written reflections over decades, thoughts about rebuilding after loss, about choosing dignity over bitterness, about refusing to let grief calcify into anger. The journal beneath the letters held sketches of the house, notes about the hidden compartment. But near the back, one final entry stood alone. If you are reading this, I hope you understand something I did not for many years. Starting over is not an admission of failure. It is an act of courage. The key does not open this box. It opens you. Linda let the journal fall gently into her lap. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the tin roof like applause. She had come here thinking she was escaping something, but maybe she had been arriving all along. A sudden crash jolted her upright. The wind had slammed the back door open. She rose quickly, heart racing, and crossed the kitchen. The storm had grown violent, branches bending, leaves tearing free from trees. As she pushed the door shut against the wind, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. At the far edge of the property, a figure. A man standing near the old fence line. Watching the house, lightning flashed, and for a split second, she saw him clearly tall, wearing a dark raincoat, hat pulled low. Then darkness swallowed him again. Her stomach tightened. The house wasn't as forgotten as she thought. She locked the door carefully, returned to the fireplace, closed the iron box and slid it back into the hidden space, but kept the letters and journal in her hands. The storm raged for hours, but inside, something had shifted. The key had opened more than a compartment beneath stone. It had unlocked something steadier inside her. She was no longer a woman running from an ending. She was a woman standing guard over a beginning. And whoever that man was in the rain, he had just stepped into a story far bigger than he realized. Linda barely slept that night. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered not in the sky, but in her chest. Every creak of the old farmhouse sounded louder now. Every shifting branch outside the window felt intentional. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of the man by the fence line. Had he been real? Or had the lightning simply painted fear onto shadows? By dawn, the sky had cleared to a pale silver. The world outside looked washed clean, as if the storm had erased something heavy. Linda brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Birds had returned to their morning songs. The hills rolled peacefully under a soft mist. And yet, there were footprints in the mud. Near the fence, large, fresh, leading towards the tree line. Her stomach tightened, but not in panic. In clarity, the house wasn't abandoned. It had history. And history has a way of drawing people back. Instead of retreating inside, Linda did something that would have shocked the woman she used to be. She followed the footprints. Not far, just to the edge of the field, just far enough to prove to herself she wasn't going to shrink from the unknown. The prints disappeared into the trees. She stood there a long moment, hands tucked into her coat pockets, feeling the morning wind brush against her face. For most of her marriage, she had avoided confrontation. If something felt wrong, she swallowed it. If something scared her, she deferred. But standing there now, she realized something simple and undeniable. She had already survived the worst thing she thought could happen, losing the life she built. What else was there to fear? When she returned to the house, she didn't lock herself in. She opened every curtain, let light flood every room. The farmhouse no longer felt fragile. It felt awake. Later that afternoon, a pickup truck rolled slowly down the gravel road. Linda saw it from the kitchen window. An older man stepped out, late 60s, maybe early 70s, weathered face, hands like someone who'd worked with tools his whole life. He removed his hat politely before approaching the porch. Linda opened the door before he knocked. "Ma'am," he said gently. "Name's Walter Grady. I own the property east of yours." She nodded. "Linda Ashcroft?" He studied her for a moment, not unkindly. "I suppose you found the hearth." Her breath paused. "I'm sorry." "The old compartment," he clarified. "Samuel told me about it years ago. Said he built that hiding place for things that mattered." "You knew him?" Walter nodded slowly. Everyone in Briar Glen knew Sam Calder. Stubborn man. Grieving man. But good. "Why were you here last night?" she asked quietly. He didn't deny it. "I saw the lights come on in the house a few days ago. Figured someone finally bought it. Wanted to make sure it wasn't developers or flippers." He shifted his weight. "Storm caught me checking the fence line." Linda held his gaze. "You could have knocked. Didn't want to scare you." She almost laughed at that. "I was scared anyway." Walter's expression softened. That house has a way of pulling on people when they're at a crossroads. Linda folded her arms lightly, not defensively, but protectively. "What do you mean?" "Sam didn't hide money in that box," Walter said. "He hid letters." Her heart skipped. "You knew." "He told me once," Walter replied. Said someday someone would need those words more than he did. The porch fell silent. Wind stirred through the tall grass. "I needed them," Linda admitted. Walter nodded, as if that confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "Then the house chose right." She felt something shift in her chest again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was understanding. The man in the rain wasn't a threat. He was a witness. Why didn't anyone claim the house after Sam died? She asked. Walter looked toward the hills. He didn't leave it to family. He left it to timing. That's not legally binding. Walter smiled faintly. No, but some things don't need paperwork to matter. They stood there a long moment. Then he added, more seriously, there are folks who've tried to buy that land cheap over the years, developers sniffing around. If word spreads, there's something valuable hidden here. They'll come knocking. Linda thought of the iron box, of the letters, of the journal entry that had cracked something open inside her. There's no treasure, she said firmly. Good, Walter replied, because treasure attracts the wrong kind of hunger. After he left, Linda sat alone on the porch steps. The sun dipped low behind the hills, turning the sky amber and gold. She thought about Samuel building this house after losing his wife, about hiding not wealth, but wisdom, about the way she had nearly overlooked the most important message of all. The key wasn't meant to unlock possession. It was meant to unlock perspective. For weeks after her divorce, she had framed her life as a loss. Lost marriage, lost identity, lost future. But what if this wasn't loss? What if it was pruning? What if everything that had been stripped away was simply clearing space? She rose slowly and walked back inside. The farmhouse no longer felt like an abandoned structure she had purchased out of desperation. It felt like stewardship. Like she had inherited something intangible but sacred. That night, instead of weeping, she wrote. She opened Samuel's journal to a blank page and added her own entry beneath his last words. March 18th. I thought I came here because I had nowhere else to go. But maybe I came because this house knew I needed to remember who I am. She set the pen down. The key lay on the table beside her. Not as a mystery now, but as a reminder. Some locks are made of iron, others are made of doubt. And once doubt breaks, you never live small again. The opportunity didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, the way most life-changing things do. 3 days after Walter Grady's visit, Linda was in town buying nails and paint thinner when she noticed a handwritten flyer pinned to the bulletin board outside Briar Glen's diner. Community Heritage Fair, seeking local history displays. Saturday, Town Square. She almost walked past it. For years, she had avoided attention, blended in, stayed small, but something made her stop. She stared at the words longer than necessary. Local history. The farmhouse. Samuel's letters. The quiet legacy of resilience hidden in stone. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled one of the contact tabs from the bottom of the flyer and slipped it into her purse. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Linda hadn't planned to attend. She had told herself she wasn't from here enough to participate. But by mid-morning, she found herself loading a small wooden crate into the back of her pickup truck. Inside the crate were photocopies of 2 of Samuel's letters. Not the most personal ones, not the ones that felt sacred, just enough to share his voice. At the last minute, she added something else the old key. She wrapped it carefully in a linen napkin and placed it beside the letters. The town square buzzed with folding tables and homemade pies, quilts draped across rails, children running between booths. It felt like stepping into a slower decade. Walter spotted her first. "Well, I'll be," he said, tipping his hat as she approached. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. He gestured toward an empty table near the edge of the gazebo. "That one's been waiting." She sat up quietly, laid out the copies of Samuel's handwriting, placed a small handwritten sign. The Ashwood Farmhouse, letters from a man who started over. At first, no one stopped. People drifted past politely. But then a woman in her early 60s paused. She read one letter slowly. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached the final line. "Did he really write this?" she asked softly. Linda nodded. "After he lost his wife." The woman swallowed. "My husband passed 2 years ago." Her voice broke. I've been trying to sell our house ever since. Can't bear to stay." Linda felt something settle inside her. Not sorrow, but connection. "He stayed," Linda said gently. "He rebuilt." More people gathered. A widower, a retired schoolteacher, a man who admitted he was facing bankruptcy after his business collapsed. They weren't asking about the house. They were asking about the letters. By afternoon, Linda realized something unexpected. The farmhouse wasn't just a refuge. It was a message, and people needed it. That evening, Walter approached her as she packed up. "You ever think about hosting something out there?" he asked casually. "Hosting what?" "Small gatherings, story nights. Folks around here carry more grief than they talk about. That house, it has a way of making silence feel safe." The idea felt terrifying. And right, that night, sitting by the fireplace, Linda turned the key over in her hands again. For weeks, she had thought the key's purpose ended when it opened the iron box. But maybe that was only the first turn. Maybe it wasn't about unlocking compartments. Maybe it was about unlocking community. 2 weeks later, she hung a new sign at the end of her gravel driveway. "Second Sunday supper. Bring a dish, bring a story." She almost took it down 3 times before the day arrived. What if no one came? What if it was foolish? What if she was reaching beyond her place? At 5 o'clock sharp, a single car pulled into the clearing. Then another. Then 3 more. Walter came with cornbread. The widow from the fair brought sweet tea. The retired teacher carried a casserole wrapped in foil. They sat in folding chairs arranged in a circle near the fireplace. At first, the conversation stayed polite. Weather, crops, road repairs. Then Walter cleared his throat. "I'll start," he said. "My wife passed 12 years ago. I've been angry ever since. Silence, honest silence. Not awkward, sacred." And then he continued. By the time he finished, the widow was wiping tears. The teacher spoke next. Then the man who lost his business. Then Linda. She hadn't planned to, but when her turn came, the words rose naturally. "I didn't lose someone to death," she said quietly. "I lost myself in a marriage that ended without drama. Just emptiness. I came here because I didn't know who I was anymore." She held up the key. "I thought this was going to unlock treasure. It unlocked truth instead." No one laughed. No one dismissed it. They understood. That night stretched long past sunset. When the last car drove away, Linda remained seated by the dying fire. The farmhouse no longer felt like a structure she was fixing. It felt alive, purposeful. She looked around the room, the worn floors, the patched walls, the stone hearth. Samuel had built a shelter for grief. She was building something new inside it. Connection? The next morning, she received a call from the local newspaper. Someone from the fair had shared photos of the letters. They wanted to run a small feature, "The House That Helps People Start Over." She laughed when she hung up. 6 months ago, she had been a woman afraid to raise her voice. Now strangers were asking for her story. Opportunity had not arrived as money, or romance, or redemption from her past. It had arrived as usefulness, and usefulness felt better than validation ever had. She placed the key on the mantel that evening. Not hidden, not secret. A symbol. She had given up everything to start over. But she was beginning to understand something profound. Starting over doesn't mean starting alone. Sometimes the very thing you think you bought to survive becomes the place where others learn how to live again. By the second Sunday supper, the farmhouse could no longer pretend to be forgotten. Cars lined the gravel road. Laughter drifted through open windows. And for the first time since Linda Ashcroft had signed those divorce papers, the house felt louder than the silence she once feared. But growth has a way of inviting resistance. And resistance arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a white SUV and a man in a pressed gray coat. Linda was repainting the porch railing when he stepped out, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Ms. Ashcroft," he called. She wiped her hands on a rag and walked toward him. Steady. That's me. My name is Daniel Mercer. I represent Ridgeline Development. The name meant nothing at first. Then he added, We recently acquired the 200 acres north of this property. Her stomach tightened. Congratulations, she replied calmly. He glanced toward the house, toward the sign still posted near the road. Second Sunday supper? A thin smile touched his lips. We've been reviewing zoning adjustments in this area. It appears your property may fall within a new expansion corridor. She didn't blink. And what does that mean? It means, he said gently, as if explaining weather to a child, that this farmhouse may soon be surrounded by commercial development, retail, condos, infrastructure upgrades. Her chest went still. Or, he continued, you could sell now, while the offer is generous. He handed her a folder. The number inside was more money than she had ever seen in one place. More than enough to buy comfort. More than enough to disappear somewhere warmer, easier. You'd have 30 days, he added. We'd preserve the structure if possible. Preserve, like a museum piece. Like something dead. She closed the folder slowly. I'll think about it. He nodded, satisfied. As the SUV rolled away, Linda stood alone in the gravel, heart pounding, not from fear. From temptation. That night, she didn't mention it to anyone, but the offer sat on the kitchen table like a test. Sell. Take the money. Start over, again. Isn't that what she had done before? Wasn't she brave enough to walk away? By Sunday, she couldn't hold it in. After the last casserole dish was set down and the stories began to circle the room, she cleared her throat. There's something I need to tell you all. The room quieted. She explained the offer. The development plans. The money. Silence followed. Then Walter spoke. How much? She told him. A low whistle filled the air. That's life-changing money, someone muttered. The widow looked down at her hands. You'd leave, she asked softly. Linda didn't answer right away, because she didn't know. That night, after everyone left, she sat alone by the fireplace. The key rested on the mantel above her. For the first time since she found it, it felt heavy again. She took Samuel's journal down from the shelf and flipped through familiar pages. Her eyes landed on a line she hadn't thought much about before. The world will always offer you comfort in exchange for conviction. Her breath slowed. Conviction. What was hers? Did she build this house into something meaningful just to sell it when it became inconvenient? Was this about protecting wood and stone, or protecting what had grown inside these walls? A sudden knock rattled the front door. She startled. It was nearly midnight. When she opened it, Walter stood there, hat in hand. I couldn't sleep, he admitted. Figured you might not be either. She stepped aside to let him in. They sat by the fire in comfortable quiet. You thinking of selling? He asked gently. I don't know, she answered honestly. He nodded. My son sold our family farm 10 years ago. Good price. Said he wanted an easier life. He stared into the flames. He's comfortable now, but he's restless. Linda listened. Comfort doesn't always equal peace, Walter continued. This place, it's doing something rare. You don't abandon rare. She looked at him carefully. What if they build around it anyway? Then you stand anyway. His answer came without hesitation. The next morning, Linda did something she had never done in her entire life. She called Ridgeline Development. I won't be selling, she said calmly. A pause. Ms. Ashcroft, you may regret that decision. I already regret living small for 30 years, she replied evenly. I won't do it again. She hung up before her courage could wobble. 2 days later, the unexpected happened. A reporter from a regional news station arrived unannounced. Apparently, someone from the supper gatherings had shared the development story online. The headline spread faster than she imagined. Local widow refuses. 6-figure offer to preserve community healing space. Cars arrived that evening, not just from Briar Glen but from neighboring counties. People wanted to see the house that chose conviction over cash. And then something extraordinary unfolded. An elderly couple approached her with a check. For improvements, they said, a retired contractor offered free labor to reinforce the structure. The widow whose husband had passed away stood in the doorway and whispered, "If they try to push you out, you won't stand alone." The farmhouse had stopped being Linda's refuge. It had become the town's. Late that night, exhausted but steady, Linda stood in the center of the living room. The key glinted in the firelight. She realized something profound. The development offer wasn't the threat. It was the final test. When she bought this house, she thought she was rebuilding her life. But life had rebuilt her instead. The timid woman who once avoided confrontation had just stood against a corporation. Not with anger, not with pride, but with clarity. Outside, headlights appeared again at the fence line. The same white SUV. But this time, she didn't feel small. She stepped onto the porch, waited. The SUV idled, then slowly drove away. For the first time since arriving in Briar Glen, Linda understood something deeper than courage. She wasn't protecting the house. The house had prepared her to protect herself. And whatever Ridgeline tried next, they would no longer be dealing with a woman who was starting over. They would be dealing with a woman who had finally arrived. Spring arrived quietly in Briar Glen. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with sudden warmth, but with small mercies, softer light, longer evenings, the first stubborn wildflowers pushing through cold earth. Linda Ashcroft stood on the farmhouse porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching mist lift slowly from the fields. The white SUV hadn't returned in weeks. Ridgeline Development had shifted its expansion south after community pushback, public scrutiny, and as one local headline put it, a small house with a very loud voice. She hadn't defeated them with lawsuits. She hadn't needed to. She had stood still long enough for others to stand with her, and that had been enough. The farmhouse looked different now, not because it had been renovated into something polished, but because it had been lived in. The porch railings were freshly painted. A long wooden table Walter helped her build now sat beneath the oak tree out front. Wind chimes hung near the kitchen window, a gift from the widow who no longer introduced herself as alone. Inside, Samuel Calder's journal rested on the mantel beside the key. Not hidden, honored. The second Sunday suppers had grown. People drove in from neighboring towns now. A retired pastor offered to lead occasional reflection nights. A local musician brought a fiddle one evening and filled the living room with music that made grown men blink back tears. But the most powerful change wasn't in the gatherings. It was in Linda. One evening, nearly a year after she had first turned that key, she sat alone by the fireplace. The house was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet she used to fear. This was full quiet, earned quiet. She ran her fingers along the stone hearth where the hidden compartment lay concealed. She remembered that first day, the trembling, the doubt, the way she had expected treasure, something tangible to justify her risk. Instead, she had found words, and those words had changed her trajectory more than money ever could. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find the woman from the Heritage Fair, the one who had lost her husband. But she looked different now. Stronger. "I sold my house," the woman said, breathless with something like relief. Not because I couldn't stay, but because I realized I was holding on to it out of fear. Linda listened carefully. "I'm buying a smaller place near my sister. I wouldn't have done it without this house. Without your story." She handed Linda a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me that starting over is not betrayal, it's bravery." Linda swallowed hard. After the woman left, she returned to the fire and sat down slowly. She realized something profound. She hadn't just refused to sell the house. She had refused to sell herself short again. A year ago, she had been a woman defined by what ended. Now she was defined by what she chose. The next Sunday supper was different. It wasn't larger. It was deeper, as the circle formed near the fireplace. Linda held the key in her palm. "I want to tell you something," she began, voice steady but soft. "When I found this key, I thought it would unlock something hidden. I thought maybe there was money buried here, or something valuable enough to make all this risk worth it." She held it up, but it didn't unlock a vault. It unlocked a question. She looked around the room. "What are you still locking away because you're afraid to begin again?" Silence. Then tears. Then honesty. Walter admitted he had been considering selling his land because he felt too old to maintain it, not because he wanted to leave. The retired teacher confessed she had never written the novel she dreamed about because she believed it was too late. The musician said he hadn't played publicly in 20 years. One by one, walls came down. Not dramatically, but truthfully. Later that night, after everyone left, Linda stepped outside alone. The sky above Briar Glen stretched wide and impossibly clear, stars scattered like quiet witnesses. She thought about her old life, the house she had given up, the marriage that had dissolved without shouting, the woman she used to be, careful, accommodating, silent. She didn't hate that version of herself anymore. She understood her. That woman had survived, but this woman had awakened. She walked to the edge of the field where she had once seen a figure standing in the rain. The fence line stood firm. The land stretched undisturbed, and she smiled, because she finally understood something that no divorce settlement could teach and no development offer could threaten. Home is not the structure you protect. It is the courage you inhabit. The farmhouse had never been about escape. It had been about arrival. She returned to the porch and paused before going inside. The wind stirred softly through the trees. For a moment, she imagined Samuel Calder standing somewhere beyond the hills, watching quietly. Not as a ghost, but as a reminder. The key had fit no ordinary lock, because it was never meant to open a door. It was meant to open a life. And now, as firelight flickered warmly through the windows of the once-forgotten house at the end of a gravel road, Linda Ashcroft was no longer the woman who gave up everything. She was the woman who chose everything. And that choice, that was the real treasure. Anyone can start over if they're willing to let go of who they were, and brave enough to become who they're meant to be. Samuel built a house to survive his grief. Linda bought that house to survive her own. Neither of them knew that what they were really building wasn't shelter, it was strength. The key that fit no lock wasn't useless. It simply wasn't meant for doors made of wood and iron. It was meant for doors made of fear. And once you unlock fear, you stop negotiating with your own potential. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share what starting over means in your life. And if you believe it's never too late to unlock a new chapter, subscribe. Because sometimes the story you need to hear next is closer than you think.